Now, let's look at inherited hemolytic anemias. There are three types which come into it: hereditary spherocytosis, sickle cell disease, and thalassemias. Now, if we look at hereditary spherocytosis, in this there is an inherited defect in the RBC's cell membrane. The cell membrane becomes round in shape, it is less deformable, the flexibility is less, and it becomes more vulnerable of breaking down when it passes through the splenic cords. Now the pathogenesis is that the defect lies in the proteins of the cell membrane of the RBC, and these proteins are spectrin, ankyrin, and protein 4.1. Now, there is a defect in these proteins due to which the shape of the RBC is altered. It becomes sphere, due to which the strength and flexibility of the red cell becomes compromised, and they are destroyed in the spleen. Now, the clinical features that you're going to see is uh, it can be a totally asymptomatic condition, or at the other end, there can be severe anemia associated with it. Now, in this case, you might find episodes of jaundice because as hemolysis is occurring, RBCs are being broken down. When hemoglobin comes out, we know when it degrades, it forms bilirubin. So when the levels of bilirubin are going to increase, you will see jaundice. Spleen will become enlarged. It can become palpable because it is overworked and it is destroying all these spherocytes. And it becomes congested with these spherocytes, so spleen is palpable and sometimes even painful. Then you might experience hemolytic crisis. Hemolytic crisis is when there is attacks of episodes of increased hemolysis in which jaundice, splenomegaly, and anemia will become very, very evident. Then there might be phases of aplastic crisis in which the bone marrow totally stops functioning. It totally stops functioning. Apart from that, you will find pigment gallstones, you might find leg ulcers in some cases. And if you go towards the investigation, if you look at the blood film, what you are going to see is spherocytes, RBCs are going to be round in shape, and reticulocytes. Serum bilirubin and urobilinogen, they are going to be raised. Then you do osmotic fragility test. In this, what you do is you place the red blood cells in a fluid which is hypotonic, and gradually, and then you see, then you note the time, how long does it take for it to absorb water and burst. Then you keep on increasing the hypertonicity of the fluid and keep on recording the time. What we see is spherocytes, they rupture early as compared to the normal RBCs in such hypotonic fluids. Now the management, splenectomy can help because once spleen is removed, the destruction of RBCs will be destroyed, it will be delayed. Then you can correct the anemia, and I mean, the thing is, you will have to see according to the etiology what intervention you're going to take. Like in hemolytic crisis, you're going to give blood transfusions. If there are some sort of stones formed, you will look where they are formed and if they are causing any problems. If there's a gallstone and if there's, you are going to take appropriate action. You might have to remove the gallbladder. So you have to see what the sign symptoms are, and then the management is going to be accordingly. Now we look at sickle cell disease. In sickle cell disease, again, this is a hereditary disorder. In this, the hemoglobin is structurally abnormal. In this, what you are going to see you are going to see a variety of hemoglobin which is known as hemoglobin S. Now what happens is in these RBCs, the hemoglobin crystallizes when the oxygen tension is decreased, or if there is some sort of a dehydration, and the hemoglobin and the RBCs, they shrink and they acquire the shape of a sickle. Sickle in our native tongue we call a daranti, which we use, which you see farmers using in the fields to cut the crop. It becomes like a sickle, like a crescent shaped, like this, instead of the biconvex. So these cells, they become rigid, and when they become rigid, when they try to pass through the splenic cords, they are easily broken up, they are easily lysed. Now if you look at the pathogenesis, again what we discussed, it is a hereditary disease, and in this there is substitution of the valine amino acid for glutamine amino acid in the sixth position of the beta chain of the hemoglobin. Now, whenever the oxygen tension decreases, hemoglobin S crystallizes and its shape distorts, it becomes abnormal, and it acquires the shape of a sickle. Now, basically, hemoglobin S is a useless hemoglobin. It does not have oxygen carrying capacity. It is a totally useless hemoglobin. It is of no use to our body. Now, to compensate for this anemia, what you are going to see, your bone marrow is going to become hyperactive. You are going to see hypercellularity in your bone marrow, and this hypercellularity is going to again lead to expansion of your bone marrow cavities. Again, you will see thickening of your skull bones. You will see widening of your bone marrow cavity, of your medullary cavity. You will see thinning of the cortex. So are these things are due to the hyperactivity of the bone marrow. Now, there is another problem with this sickle cell. It has an abnormal charge on it, and what this charge does, it increases the adhesive quality of these cells. What happens is these cells, they adhere, they stick to the endothelium. When they stick to the endothelium, they occlude the vessel. When they occlude the vessel, they stop the blood flow. So what happens is, as the sickle cell anemia progresses, and obviously these RBCs, they have to pass through the spleen. Spleen is one of the major organs which is affected by this adhesive quality of the sickle cell. These sickle cells, they start adhering to the endothelial lining, the blood vessels which are supplying the spleen. And as blockage keeps on occurring, what happens is infarction starts setting in. Ultimately, the whole of the spleen is infarcted, and when that happens, the spleen becomes shrunken and fibrotic. This process is known as autosplenectomy. Yani auto, the body itself has kind of surgically removed the spleen. Although the spleen is there, but it has stopped working. It has become shrunken, it has become fibrotic. Why? Because the sickle cells have blocked all the blood vessels which was supplying the spleen, which ultimately resulted in splenic infarction, and that led to fibrotic changes, and the spleen was totally destroyed. This is known as autosplenectomy. The clinical features that you will see are that of anemia and the tissue infarction. Wherever the sickle cells will block the blood vessels, you will see tissue infarction in those areas. Now, the anemia in this type is of the hemolytic type. Hemolytic type where there is hemolysis of the RBCs. In chronic form, what you are going to see is fatigue, increased susceptibility to infection. You might see leg ulcers due to ischemia, Gallstones might be formed due to increased release of hemoglobin and production of bilirubin. Bossing of skull due to hyperplasia of the bone marrow, because as RBCs are being broken, are being lysed, are being destroyed at such a fast rate, your bone marrow becomes hyperactive, the load increases, and your bone marrow cavities, they start expanding and widening. And you will also encounter in the initial stages, you will see hepatosplenomegaly. In cases of infarction, in this case, as they block different blood vessels in spleen, you see autosplenectomy occurs. And in other areas like in infants, it is seen that it affects the fingers and toes, causing they cause painful swellings, which is known as head and foot hand and foot syndrome. In adults, it is seen it causes aseptic necrosis of the head of the femur. In spleen, painful infarction is there. In kidneys, you will see necrosis and hematuria. In mesentery, again, infarction will be seen, which can lead to abdominal pain. In chest, again, pulmonary infarction. So, in all these cases, what we are seeing is that sickle cell anemia is not only causing anemia, its affinity to adhere to the endothelial lining of the blood vessel is also causing blockage of these blood vessels, and depending which blood vessel is blocked, it is causing infarction of that particular site. In investigations of the blood picture, you're going to see low hemoglobin, high reticulocyte count, and sickled erythrocytes. If you do hemoglobin electrophoresis, you will find the presence of hemoglobin S bands, which are diagnostic. Management, there is no cure, it is just symptomatic treatment. You give folic acid, you prevent or treat if there is any infection. You avoid all the precipitating factors like dehydration and hypoxia. You in hemolytic crisis, you can give oxygen, antibiotics, analgesics, even blood transfusion. If the pain is very severe, then even narcotic analgesics can be used. So this disease basically has to be managed. There is no cure for it because it is an inherited disease. Now there is a thing known as sickle cell trait. In patients who have sickle cell trait, in them less than 40% of the hemoglobin is of the variety of hemoglobin S. Rest of the hemoglobin is normal. So under normal conditions, if they are not subjected to any anoxic condition, these people can live a normal life. The 60 or 60 plus percent of normal hemoglobin that they have, it is able to compensate for this hemoglobin S. And if no adverse or anoxic conditions are offered to these individuals can lead a normal life. Now let's look at thalassemias. Thalassemia is a genetic disorder of which is related with hemoglobin synthesis, and in this, the chains of hemoglobin, they become defective. Now, hemoglobin is made up of two types of chains, alpha chains and beta chains. There are two alpha chains and there are two beta chains. These two alpha and beta polypeptide chains, they combine to form heme. They combine with heme to form hemoglobin. Now, the defect is in these globin chains. So thalassemias can be of two type. Either there can be beta thalassemia or there can be alpha thalassemia. Now let's look at beta thalassemia. Beta thalassemia can be of two types. Minor beta thalassemia and major beta thalassemia. Now basically the beta chains in normal homozygotes. Homozygote means where two identical forms of gene are received from either parent. Yeah. In other words, the mother and the father both contribute one gene each, and both genes are identical. So, in normal zygote conditions, the mother contributes a normal beta chain and the father contributes a normal beta chain. This forms a normal beta chain complex. Now, in a heterozygote is where one parent contributes a normal gene and the other parent contributes an abnormal gene. So, in heterozygote, one gene is normal but the other gene is abnormal. That is, it is a thalassemic gene. But what happens in such an individual where one gene is normal and the other gene is abnormal? That person has thalassemia minor. Now, the normal gene, it produces enough beta chains to maintain normal hemoglobin levels. So, this person basically becomes a carrier because the normal beta gene produces enough beta chains which compensate for the abnormal gene also. So, in thalassemia minor, basically these patients are carriers, and usually their hemoglobin is it remains normal or might go a little below normal, but technically they are around normal. Now, in abnormal homozygote, please look at the two definitions. In normal homozygote, both genes from parents are normal. In abnormal homozygote, both genes from either parent are abnormal. When we put abnormal word in front of homozygote, that means one gene which was contributed by the father was abnormal and the other gene which was contributed by the mother was also abnormal. So abnormal homozygote, when both genes are abnormal from both the parents, then that child will get thalassemia major. Now, in case of thalassemia major, the problem is as both the genes are abnormal, we do not get normal formation of beta chains. So, in this case, the formation of beta chain is reduced. Now, what is happening? The beta chains are abnormal, but the alpha chain production is absolutely normal. So, what happens? The alpha chains keep on forming, and the alpha chain which is being formed is absolutely normal. The alpha chain, it will combine with any available beta chain which it can find. If there are no beta chains available, what alpha chains will do, it will start combining with gamma chains. Now, gamma chains are those chains which are present in fetal life. But if beta chains are not present, which are supposed to be present in adult life, these alpha chains will start combining with gamma chains to form fetal hemoglobin. Now, fetal hemoglobin is it is something which we can't use in our adult life, but as beta chain is not there, alpha chain will start combining with gamma chains to form fetal hemoglobin. And free alpha chains which cannot find any sort of gamma chain or beta chain, they will start precipitating within these red blood cells. And when they precipitate within these RBCs, they damage the cell membrane of these RBCs and become them more liable for phagocytosis and destruction. Now, in beta thalassemia major, usually during the first year, a child can be diagnosed that he or she has thalassemia major. What you are going to see is growth retardation. You will see repeated infections. You will encounter severe anemia. You will see hyperplasia in the bone marrow. You will also see bossing of the skull, and you will encounter hepatosplenomegaly. Now, if you will investigate this child, you will find severe microcytic hypochromic anemia. You will find raised reticulocyte count. Your serum ferritin levels will be high. Your serum iron binding capacity will be totally saturated. On hemoglobin electrophoresis, you will find an increased percentage of fetal hemoglobin. Normally, it should not be more than 1% or at the most 2%. But in this case, this percentage becomes pretty high. And on X-ray, you will see that there is bossing of the skull, the medullary cavity has widened, the cortex has thinned out. Treatment is blood transfusion every 4 to 6 weeks. In some cases, splenectomy is done, and in very severe cases, even bone marrow transplantation has to be done. Where beta thalassemia minor patients are concerned, usually they are asymptomatic. Sometimes a mild form of microcytic hypochromic anemia may be present, but iron therapy is not going to correct that because the iron levels are in fact increased. They are normal in these cases. So here you just go by symptomatic treatment. Otherwise, these patients with thalassemia minor, they do well. They don't have any problems. Now, where we talk about now about beta thalassemic minor. It's also known as beta thalassemia trait, and I've also told you uh, this is something where iron therapy doesn't work. It's asymptomatic. Just give them a good diet, a good exercise regime, and usually these persons they lead a very normal life. Now let's look at alpha thalassemias. Now, alpha thalassemias, they occur due to reduction or absence of alpha genes. Now, there are four alpha genes which form these alpha chains. If one gene is defected or deleted, there are no clinical effects because the other three genes are able to take over the workload. If two of these genes are deleted or defective, you will find mild hypochromic anemia. Now, if three genes are deleted, this patient will have hemoglobin H. Now, again, hemoglobin H is functionally totally useless, and this person will show moderate anemia and splenomegaly. And if all the four genes are deleted, the baby will be stillborn, and there is going to be a lot of edema that you will find in this baby. This condition is known as hydrops fetalis because this baby, it's a stillborn baby, and you will find a lot of edema in this baby. That is why it is known as hydrops fetalis. Treatment, where hydrops fetalis is concerned, obviously it's a dead baby, there is no treatment. Hemoglobin H, again, in where three genes are deleted, it's a useless hemoglobin. The same treatment for thalassemia major, where maybe blood transfusion has to be done at regular intervals. Always avoid iron therapy in thalassemias because the iron stores are usually normal or more than normal, and we can give folic acid if required. Now, acquired hemolytic anemias, according to their etiology, they can be due to immune destruction of the WBCs due to autoantibodies like hemolytic anemias that we've just studied. Then hemolytic anemias can be due to non-immune destruction of the red blood cells like in liver or kidney diseases, or there can be miscellaneous conditions like malaria or burns in which we see destruction of the RBCs. Now, autoimmune hemolytic anemias, in this, autoantibodies are formed against RBCs which destroy the RBCs. Now, there is a test known as Coombs test. If there is autoimmune hemolytic anemia, that person is going to test positive for Coombs test. Coombs test, what it does, it detects the antibody on the surface of the RBC against which the autoantibody has been formed. Now, these Coombs tests can be of the warm and cold variety. Now, these autoantibodies, which are formed in an individual who has autoimmune hemolytic anemia, in some individuals, the antibodies attaches to the RBCs better if they are at room temperature. And in some cases, these antibodies attach to the RBCs if the temperature is lower or more cooler. If they attach at body temperature, then they are known as warm antibodies. If they attach at lower temperatures which are lower than the body temperature, then we call them cold antibodies. Where non-immune hemolytic anemias are concerned, anything. Drugs can cause them, malaria can cause them, inflammatory and neoplastic diseases can cause them, physical traumas can cause them. There are a lot of conditions in which hemolytic anemia can occur, which is of the non-immune variety. Again, transfusion is another very common variety. If there is incompatible blood, again there is hemolysis. Again, this is of the non-immune type.